The Average Citizen podcast aims to respectfully explore a variety of topics in the hopes of broaching understanding between each other and our listeners. We don't claim to be experts, but we want to model how average citizens can discuss, debate, research, and explore sensitive subjects.
Welcome back to Average Citizen. It's June 1st. It's been over, I think we released our last episode early May or maybe late April. I can't remember. We've been really busy. So we wanted to check in. It's going to be a shorter episode, kind of give you a little State of the Union address, if you will, or just kind of a meta breakdown of where we're at and what's going on with Average Citizen podcast. I also haven't written a blog post in a few months, but as is life, we've just been busy. I think there's a couple things going on as far as just content. I think the last episode I rattled off all these subjects that we could touch on, and those are certainly things that we can revisit. But I think we've both just kind of gotten caught up in the pace of our life with new things happening all the time. It was kind of hard to get a cadence. So we have decided, probably can't stick to a monthly cadence. It's going to be a pretty irregular thing. We won't go away. We're not saying this is the last episode, but we just wanted to at least check in for a quick 20 to 30 minutes and kind of recap what we've talked about before, and kind of do maybe just like a general overview where we think like culture in the country is at right now. But I don't know if that was clear at all. This is the next episode for now, but maybe we'll come back in a few months. You're just going to have to wait for a little like nugget of information. I think if you really are liked our podcast and want to listen and kind of stay at least abreast to my thoughts and Tom's as well. I mean, I'm pretty active on Twitter. I think that's where I get a lot of my news. It's where I kind of post either just really bad takes or I'm sharing articles that I think are really worth reading. And I share a lot of other sources that I think are worth following. So find me on Twitter. It's my name, Tim Dowling, 2 M's. And then also certainly, the blog is going to be picking up here as well. Sometimes I'll just write poetry for the hell of it, but that's kind of where maybe you can get content in between. Other than that, I mean, Tom, how are you?
Oh, well, Tim, it's a good summary. I'm good. I'm busy, like you said, and I'll echo your sentiment that um, look, I'll put it this way. You gain an appreciation for what content producing is like. And like, if you want to take it seriously, you have to really be on your A game. You have to be thinking critically. You have to think about timing. When are we going to publish? When are we going to produce? When are we going to record? Definitely gain some respect for people that are doing content production, in some cases daily, in some cases, right? Think about it. People are doing like daily 1 hour shows 5 days a week. And they've got it well produced and out to their audience. So from that standpoint, I think this has been a very eye-opening experience for both of us in terms of, what it takes to be successful in content production. And hopefully everybody can appreciate that the people that are producing good content, there's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like the production side, but then there's also like, especially for if you're commentating on politics and culture, you really need to be consuming a lot of news. You need to be doing a lot of research. You need to be thinking out and preparing as well. I mean, there's only very few experts in the field who have established careers in media analysis or political discourse that can actually just hop on a live hot mic and then, have a succinct, clear take. But given again the name of this podcast and blog, Average Citizen, maybe we are hope to be a little bit more representative of what a lot of our listeners have to juggle every day, right? It's
Right.
tough we both have day jobs and lives outside, and it takes a lot not just to produce a daily or weekly podcast, but it's a job. on top of everything else to juggle. So again, I think a lot of just the point of the podcast is like how does the average citizen stay informed? And I think with our first 4 episodes, we kind of did a good um, synopsis or framework of things that were really like topical and really prevalent. Starting obviously with social media. I mean, that's never going to go away, and that still continues to frame a lot of the discussion and opinions um, of the public and people who are using that. And then the last episode, though, was a little more personal about mindfulness and a little bit different than the other ones, but I think was still important to include in kind of the lineup, is because that's really the basis of not just approaching, your moment to moment life, and you can get super, into it or spiritual into it, but really it provides us a basis of how to be mindful of other people's opinions and your own opinion. And just, it's kind of, I think, just a real good skill to start enhancing your critical thinking skills. And that's really what we just want to encourage, because average citizens don't have the time to be experts on everything, but we can at least be thinking critically about the information we consume. And also, I would say, thinking critically about our own opinions and our own beliefs and our own biases. That's really the true work. But if we're to kind of give you some meat for this episode, um, I have a few thoughts. I mean, I had a few conversations over Memorial Day weekend that kind of sparked, I guess, some reflection and kind of where we're at. We're into June now of 2021. Lots of people are getting vaccinated. Things as far as culture are opening up, and kind of a lot of optimism and feeling like we're getting back to normal. The CDC has said we don't have to wear masks indoors if you're fully vaccinated. So now a lot of establishments are still requiring that, because we're on the honor system, whether you're vaxxed or not. They're not required at this point. Everyone gets a card if they want, but they don't have to show that. So there's some trust and some personal accountability for risk assessment that's kind of been laid out by the CDC and also the federal government to kind of say, hey, you're safe if you get vaccinated, but it's up to you to get vaccinated, essentially. Which, I think is a very American approach, protecting people's personal liberties. But beyond that, I can't help but like compare kind of the feeling that we're now in with just a very short time, 6 months into the Biden administration, 6 months into Democratic control of Congress, and just kind of how quickly our memories fade. I mean, just 6 months ago, June 6th, we had a major issue going on at DC, at the Capitol, with the basically planned insurrection.
January 6th. I think you said June 6th. You meant January 6th.
Yeah. January 6th, insurrection attempt, or whatever weird, attack that was, demonstration, whatever you want to call it. And I think because that's kind of, it didn't work, because Democrats are in control. I don't think the public or the left's apathy will ever get back to what it was like under Obama necessarily. But I do have a sense that people think there's less urgency, which is nice. We've kind of had time to breathe. But on the other hand, I think a lot of things are kind of still festering in the shadows, as far as kind of the far right and political extremism is still very much out there. And I would say I'm trying to stay vigilant. I'm not trying to predict the future, but if some of these characters from the previous administration aren't going to be prosecuted or held accountable, they're going to try to do something again. Like, we have a recent vote around whether they should establish an investigation into January 6th. And all Republicans in Congress are like, no, we don't need to investigate that. And so there's already a lot of sweeping under the rug of the previous crimes that have happened. And that concerns me, because if those crimes go unpunished or uninvestigated, and this doesn't even necessarily have to do with Trump personally, but kind of the whole movement that he has led and been a part of, it's going to come back in one way or another. And so there's the criminal justice that I would hope can occur, but then also the left has to get its shit together and provide some real solutions and relief and make it a very clear distinction. And I think they've done a pretty good job so far, but it's so early. And people have short memories. So I don't know. That's where my brain is at. I'm still kind of first and foremost just trying to make sure that our country doesn't fall into an authoritarian coup. I mean, you've got Michael Flynn out there talking about coup. They already tried a coup in January. If they don't do it again, or if they don't punish that attempt, it could happen again. I don't know. We'll see. It's the whole saga hasn't been wrapped up just because Trump's lost, and it's not a very clear story, or I don't have a clear take on it. But I guess just I haven't forgotten. Like, I think there's still plenty of work that needs to be done just to protect our democracy. You see a lot of the voting restriction laws that are being passed in a lot of different states, Republican states as well. You had the audit in Arizona that's kind of been a mess. So I don't know. Obviously, we're in a better position than we were a year ago for the state of, a free democracy, but there's still a lot of loose ends out there, and it's just not being talked about. So I just thought I would recall people's memories to that struggle.
So if I could sum up, I mean, when you say I have some thoughts, you were really speaking specifically to the state of, let's call it, the Democratic Republic, the state of the political infrastructure at the federal level is very much where those
Absolutely.
thoughts were coalesced around. So yeah, I guess I'll add that I agree with you that people are going to have short-term memory about Trump. And I think actually it's sad in a way to me that a lot of the focus was on Trump for so long, and just like about his behavior and how he was just unorthodox and would just say stuff that didn't make sense. And I think this might have even come up in one of our previous episodes. I don't remember, but that you and I were both saying how there was a lot of crying wolf for the 4 years of Trump, when it was just like stuff we didn't like, but wasn't necessarily that big of a deal, up until this stuff with the election was fraudulent. And then all the Republicans coming behind, the election was fraudulent. And then all the spillover of that you're alluding to here. And I think you even said, like, that's really the damage. Like, if the damage had just been this guy and this administration were totally incompetent as an administration and as a group of leaders, and they were a failed leadership and they were mostly just in it for themselves and nepotistic, I think that would have been much easier to say, hey, there was 4 years of too much scrutiny, or not too much scrutiny, but too much overhyping that problem, because that's a common problem. Failed nepotistic leadership happens all the time, but in a democratic republic, you survive it because you elect someone else who's competent. But that part at the end where the Republicans are going to cling to, we have this cultish voter base that will believe anything we say, and we're just going to continue to lie about the election. That's the piece that we need to be carrying forward with us as we think about the next, rounds of elections that are going to happen in the country. That would be my take on the matter.
Exactly. I think a lot of the unorthodoxy stuff from Trump prior to the 2020 election was still damaging. And in a lot of sense, it was kind of, some of his supporters and people are like, oh, Trump's playing 4D chess. And it's like hard to really say how really calculated or thinking ahead he really was. But I think a lot of those disregard for the customs and the traditions, like releasing your tax returns, for example, like all that stuff just enabled more and more and more and more. We're going to take a quick break and listen to a word from another Chatter Network show. Be sure to check out thechatternetwork.com and take a listen.
Welcome to Redux, a podcast about music, by a music lover, for music lovers. I'm Van Berryman, math teacher by trade, podcaster by hobby, former radio host and production coordinator, and avid music lover. Step into Redux for deep looks into album reviews with a concise but thorough comparison of an artist's first album to their most recent and their journey to get there. Plus, top 10 lists, best ofs, and other musical inputs to get you through the day. If you like what you hear, drop a follow on Instagram at Redux Podcast and feel free to let me know there what reviews you want to hear. Come along on this journey with me, sit back, and enjoy the ride.
What's the word? Just kind of anarchy, and to the point where he could now just call the election a fraud and call for this violent storm to the Capitol, and it all leads up. And so, yeah, I think what I said in a previous episode is the most damaging thing that he did for how terrible it was this, doubting the election outcomes and kind of disrupting a Democratic Republic in general. And so that piece needs to still stay in the forefront of people's minds. We can't immediately take for granted that, oh, Biden won, Democrats are in power, like it still works. Like those people there's still millions of people out there who don't believe the election was a real results. And they're not there. It doesn't really matter if Trump gets prosecuted anymore. It's kind of the larger movement. So
Can I add some more to that too?
yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind is that just saying, well, the Democrats are in power now, so it's fine, is apathetic in a number of ways. For one thing, it's apathetic because while it does not appear that the Democrats writ large are coalescing around a conspiracy theory to try and cling to power, they're not without their flaws. I mean, many of them are very corporatist, very corrupt. They use language that's misleading to the public. Like there's plenty of flaws you could list about the Democrats too. So it's not like a one party solution is an ideal solution, even if it's a party that we might think is, healthier or better for the time being. So you actually want at least what do they call it? The loyalist opposition. And the question, I think, is what are Republicans going to become? Because you need some type of opposition. If there's the mainstream media center-left supported party that's kind of the by and large popular party of the country, you do need that loyal opposition. And that's the fear for me. It's a kind of a direct effect and a secondary effect. The direct effect is that if the Republican Party maintains this level of corruption and lying, it creates this voter base that's being misled, right? And you're taking advantage of that and creating an unhealthy democracy. That's the direct effect. But then the secondary effect is there's no healthy, loyal opposition to the one party, that you would essentially become a country of one party, because it's like 70-30 in the US, right? Something like that, like 70-30, where 70 is saying I'm not a leftist, but the Republicans are out of control, which is where I'm at. But I don't want that to mean that just I have to go along with this party for everything they stand for, which isn't going to work for me either.
Yeah, and there's, the people who are really, I think, insiders, and some folks that I follow on Twitter, how I try to stay informed, are thinking about this. Is the Democratic Party going to split up to where the center moderate Democrats now become kind of the new Republican Party, or are we going to see that? And then the AOC progressive wing is going to split. Is the Democratic Party going to split to kind of represent that balance, or because it really just doesn't look like there are enough current Republicans or conservative politicians who could really have a opposition party that's sane. You know, you're seeing what's happening with Liz Cheney getting ousted. So there's not a lot of hope. So there's still, I still have some anxiety about just the function of the government and the function of the democracy itself. With that being said, it's like, what can the average citizen do about any of that? Besides being informed, staying vigilant, I would say there's also, back to your point, there's plenty to examine and criticize within the Democratic Party, but away from politics, because again, I think the average citizen is not that politically inclined, but we are all culturally inclined. It's the water we swim in is our culture. And so how do we participate in our culture to make dire outcomes less likely? That's, I think, I mean, a lot of politics are derived from cultural shifts anyways, right? So that's really the driver in a lot of this stuff. I'm encouraged, at least by some coronavirus responses. I think the average person, to keep repeating the title, average citizen, I think has found like my sense is a rationale. They understand now through the last year, and I think we've learned a lot as a society that, there has to be some kind of balanced response, and it comes down to a lot of personal responsibility and every citizen kind of had to do their own research in a way, given the confusion and how new it was and the information available. But then also, culturally, just how we treat one another is kind of a cliche, but I think ultimately if neighbors can trust one another, that's where really the fabric of society can be strengthened. Is it's easy to get wrapped up in the news, and it's also kind of tough, I think, when you live in your little bubble, to really get a good grasp of that. I don't know where I'm really leading with this. I guess I'm posing the question not just to you, but to a lot of our listeners, or all of our listeners, is what do we do each day in our lives to strengthen our democracy in a cultural sense, like almost out of politics, but just
engender trust. How do you maintain and engender trust amongst the citizenry so that there feels like a collective soul, despite differences? And I think one simple way is what we tried to model here, which is the intellectual curiosity and humility. And I think our first episode, social media episode, talked about how one harm of social media is that it does not breed or foster or incentivize intellectual humility and curiosity. It's very much about decide what team you're on and then propagate the opinions of that team and then fight the enemy. And so even though social media is a tool to get information, I would say that hope, and tell me if you disagree, but I think you agree, use social media to get information and use it intelligently. Like with great power comes great responsibility, but then try to not get in the cycle of draw the line. This is the team I'm on. These are there for the opinions I have, and go attack the other team and participate in that tribalism. If people stopped doing that, I think you would see a lot more common ground being reached.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because a lot of our life is online, and a lot of the information we get is from social media. So that's where a lot happens. It's kind of more difficult. Obviously, you're going to be cordial in public. It's so much easier in a way to like wave at a stranger or do nice like things like that in person. But then you're seeing all this frustration and angst and shit happening online, that makes us feel, or enables a feeling of division that in real life might not exist as much. I just think it's, there's kind of a meme I've seen going around, and I sent this to you as well, because I was like, oh shit, that's us. And it's like, hey, I'm a white guy and I like to play devil's advocate. And that's because I'm privileged and I don't empathize with, whatever your trope is, or your injustice. And obviously I'm like, oh, well, I like to play devil's advocate, but it doesn't mean I'm unempathetic. Obviously, like I can appreciate and recognize the privileges in my life, and I understand the point of the meme, but I also think that is like really not constructive, not helpful to kind of a larger trend over time. If you're trying to like downplay or push down people who ask questions or are poking holes in things, especially when it's just like an online conversation or a discussion that is not so personal. I think people they bring in their personal stories and anecdotes and identities into those political and cultural conversations, because that's, it's who they are. Everyone brings their biases in and their stories in. But to, I think, make progress in those conversations, and I think this also where mindfulness can help out, is to be able to separate your personal experience and story and identity. And that doesn't mean to ignore it or not acknowledge it. It just means to like hold it to the side, hold it in one hand, and then in the other hand, be able to hold someone else's identity or cultural opinion, and try to bridge the two and understand how just because one is different or disagrees with the other doesn't necessarily mean that one is untrue, or what happens a lot of time is malicious, right?
Yeah. The assumption is made that by virtue of disagreeing or having an opinion, it's not just that it's a difference of opinion, it's that it's harmful, that the presence of that disagreement is actively harmful toward,
even to choose its violence against me.
Right.
Yeah. And so we have to, I think, all figure that out. Because if you can't have those discussions, and if you can't, swallow your pride in a sense, and just even try to find the holes in your own logic, and look a little bit down the road about, well, what if we keep using this philosophy or voting for Democrats without criticizing them or whatever, that can get off the rails real easily. And history has proven that as well. So, yeah. So I guess that's kind of where we're at. I think with the first 4 episodes, social media, I think we did an example with the economy. That's a little easier to be impersonal about in a way. And then the coronavirus, and then mindfulness. I think with those 4 was kind of a good palette of topics that can hopefully, certainly they help me when I think about all 4 of those things, be a little bit more grounded, a little bit more centered, a little bit more informed about how I approach more complicated issues perhaps. But given that it's kind of a quieter year as far as there's no big elections this year, there are plenty of local things you get involved in. I think the shift is really becoming more cultural, and it's kind of like, where do we go from here as a culture?
Especially now that Trump's out and COVID is winding down.
We don't have, what do we focus on?
The big hot ticket items for the last 5 years have been what crazy shit did Trump do? And then COVID. And now that, I think maybe we can wrap it up on this point. Like, now that those things are winding down, we have these concerns lingering that you and I are talking about, and we've encouraged people to maintain their intellectual humility and curiosity and be able to hold competing points of view at the same time and go forward with that framework. Keep vigilant and stay abreast of what's going on, and we encourage you to hold that framework when you do so. And then maybe we'll be back in 3 months with because something crazy has happened.
Yeah, I think you know, if you want to stick with us, keep following us. Again, I think I'm gonna plug my Twitter again. I'd love to get more Twitter followers. I think I have like 60, just because that's the platform where I think a lot of these type of conversations happen. Not necessarily in the best term, but a lot of these conversations happen on Twitter, or there's a lot of information that can spark the discussions. A lot of like, it's just, that's where things are at. So follow me on Twitter. Tom, do you have a Twitter? Do you want to plug that at all or no?
Yeah, sure. You can look me up at TM Creighton.
TM
Creighton.
Tim Dowling.
I'm not active on Twitter, but I'm welcome followers. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give people something to kind of stay in touch with us.
Sure.
And you can continue to listen to our stuff and find us on the Chatter Network, as well as averagecitizen.com. That's avgcitizen.com. Thank you for your time. Stay vigilant.
Have a safe summer.
Peace.